Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Future of Journalism. My name is Kirit Radia. I'm a proud A05 grad and currently the Senior Assignment Editor for International News at ABC News, which is a fancy way of saying, or a long way at least, of saying that I run the foreign news coverage, the foreign desk here at ABC News. I'm so happy to have everybody here. Although we can't gather in person, I'm thrilled to welcome almost 350 alums, parents, and friends of Tufts to this event from around the world. And so we're here for Virtual Reunion Week, which features alumni panels, faculty lectures, and several fun events for people to enjoy from their homes. So couldn't be more excited to moderate this panel today of all these extremely talented jumbos who work in a variety of fields around the media business at some of the top publications and media outlets in the country. I just want to say on behalf of my colleagues here, this has been a trying year for all of us. It's been a difficult year, as I know it's for everybody trying to work from home, but I think all of us would agree that it's been amazing to see the degree to which the shows that all of you watch, the publications you all read, have been able to keep going during this pandemic, working from home, keeping on the air. And I know we're all very proud of the way that's gone. So before I introduce our panelists or let them introduce themselves, I just want to go over a couple quick housekeeping items. You'll notice that your audio and video have been turned off to eliminate any distractions or background noise. We will have an audience Q&A session after our discussion. And if you'd like to ask a question, please do so using the Q&A chat function on the lower right portion of your screen. This webinar is going to be recorded and it will be uploaded to the Tufts Alumni YouTube channel. Amanda, who's on here and has done a great job putting this all together for us, so we all owe her a debt of gratitude, will post the link to that on the page and you'll receive an email when the video is ready for viewing. And you'll notice that the closed captioning is on. If you would like to turn this feature off, click the live transcript at the bottom of your screen and hit hide subtitles. And then lastly, I would just call your attention to our community values. Our goal is to create an environment where everyone feels welcome to participate, to speak up, to ask questions, and to participate in a respectful conversation. I know Amanda's going to post those values now as well. And I really do hope it is that, a conversation between all of us. These are big, weighty topics that not just us in the news business, but I know everybody around the country has been talking about. So now that we've covered everything that we need to cover, let me just jump into our program. And I'll start by asking each of these panelists to briefly introduce themselves. Queenette, how about you kick us off?
Good evening, morning, afternoon, wherever you are, fellow jumbos. Welcome. I'm very excited to be here. As you heard, my name is Queenette Karikari. I'm class of 2010 from Tufts. I am a producer at the Fox News Network in New York. So that would be the national network where you're going to find the Sean Hannitys, the Tucker Carlson, and Fox and Friends and the whole gang. I've been at Fox since 2011. It's the only outfit I've ever worked at. I've never produced anywhere else. I started off at Citigroup when I first graduated from Tufts, decided it was not for me, pivoted very quickly into media, started at the Fox Business Network, and then moved over to the Fox News Channel. I write scripts. I do a lot of research. I spend most of the day with our anchors and our other talent going over the news of the day, and sort of discussing the angles that we want to hit the hardest and what we want to talk about, and sort of what the goals we want to achieve with our audience through the topics we discuss on the show every day. And it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. Noah, how about you go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Noah Kirsch. I graduated Tufts in 2015. And I'm a staff writer at Forbes magazine, where I've worked for the last 5 years, covering a bunch of different things. And I think I'll leave it at that for now. Good to be here.
Great. And then last but not least, my old friend Mike, who Mike and I worked together at ABC News before he left us. And someday I'll forgive him for it. Go ahead, Mike.
Hey, everyone. First of all, just want to thank Amanda and Kirit for setting this up, and Kirit taking time out of a very light week in international news to moderate this. I got my start in journalism working at ABC at Good Morning America, and I'm now a booking producer at Morning Joe on MSNBC, where I work with the hosts Mika, Joe, and Willie Geist, and our executive producer to figure out, what are the big stories of the day, and figure out the appropriate guests to have on the program to talk about those news stories. And I graduated in 2011. Go Jumbos.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, everybody. I was laughing with everybody before this that a couple of years ago I was the younger ones on this panel, and now I guess I'm not so young. I'm moderating this, which is such a weird thing to think about. Listen, so we have so many questions that people have submitted already. I have a couple just as the privilege of the chair that I'll throw out to the group to sort of frame our discussion. But I do encourage everybody again to submit questions, I hope this is a discussion. We have encouraged our panelists to try to keep it short so that we can get as many questions in as possible. I'll kick it off with the first big topic that we can talk about, which is, I think we would all agree, the big seismic shift in the industry over the last, well, it's been a constant evolving thing, but really in the last few years, the idea of technology and journalism. Technology has been a challenge, but an opportunity too. It's enabled us to do so many more things than we could have before. But also it's also has shaped the way revenue and the way people do business in this industry too. So Mike, I went to you last on the introductions. Why don't you offer some thoughts that you might have on the opportunities and challenges of technology and journalism?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the biggest thing is speed and access. Like that's what we've gained with the advent of social media, Twitter, the ability to Zoom with people and make international calls on a whim, whereas it used to take a long time to set that kind of thing up. Those are the biggest, the strongest assets that you gain from having tech and evolving tech, and it's just changing so fast. I know that now the discussion is as people move away from cable and from network TV and onto streaming, I mean at some point the broadband access is going to increase and people are going to be able to stream their favorite news show, and that news show is probably not going to be something that millions and millions of people watch. It's going to be dedicated to a niche of audience and viewership. And I mean, that's probably getting ahead of things here, but we're starting to see some of that happen with the networks and broadcast cable, put resources into that. But obviously, of course, there's we're making our way through this and trying to learn as we go. And Twitter, I think over the past 10, 12 years, it was so great to have the speed and the access of news right in front of you. But we've kind of learned the hard way that there are a lot of drawbacks to that. And we've seen that play out specifically in the past 6 months. But I think it's just, it's happening so fast, and it's just a learning opportunity for everyone in the industry. But it does present a lot of great avenues for success.
Yeah, there is that constant tension between speed and accuracy, where everybody wants to be first, but you'd rather be right. I think we all agree that's the most important thing at the end of the day. Noah, you're the non-TV person in the group here. What about from where you sit? What about technology? How has that changed the way your publication works?
Yeah, I think even for a print media outlet, we're constantly trying to innovate and reach new types of consumers who wouldn't pick up a magazine. I know, frankly, and somewhat sadly, very few people my age, including myself largely, who subscribe to print magazines. People subscribe online. So I think in terms of not just finding new audiences digitally, but presenting content in new and exciting ways, I think can be really engaging. But like Mike was saying, the drawback of that is that you have a really fragmented landscape, and it can be hard to make money and find a sustainable way to do that kind of work.
Yeah, on the TV side of things, we talk about broadcast dollars and digital pennies, right? So you may get a sizable audience online, but you can't quite monetize it in the way that broadcast does, and that's one of the challenges that all of the industry is going through right now. There's big news today about AT&T spinning off, its business, and which is going to merge with Discovery, and what that's going to mean for the streaming business. So this is a constantly evolving thing, but it's coming at us fast and accelerated by the pandemic. Queenette, your organization, Fox News, has actually fared pretty well in terms of the ratings and the revenue and stuff. But talk to us a little bit about how technology has changed things over there.
I want to say that technology, it's kind of been really fantastic for Fox, right? As Mike said, you talk about speed and access. I think for me and for a lot of people, access. It's about access, and that's what technology does for us. And there are pros and cons to everything, right? But one of the best parts about technology, and it also can be the worst, is that you can have your favorite channel, you can watch what you want. Oh, I only watch Fox, I only watch MS, I only watch this. When you add in technology, you can really find your tribe. You can believe what you want to believe, and you intake the information and you interpret it the way you can, and then you go on the internet and you find people who believe the same thing you do. And of course, that can be detrimental. You can have something really wonderful, or for some, right, like an Arab Spring, and then you can have something like the Capitol attacks. So it widens access for everyone, which I think is really important. I think everyone should have access to information any way that they can, and to a wide swath of information. I think it's so important that you intake as much information as you can and decide for yourself, rather than sort of blindly following, any one network, only one outlet or anything like that. And technology allows people to be able to take in as much as they can if they'd like. But then it also helps you support, you find your tribe, in that it might help you support maybe your delusions or or anything of that nature. But at Fox, the Fox viewer is a very passionate viewer, very passionate and laser focused, a viewer, very loyal viewer. Technology has been.
Uh-oh, did we lose her? I think she was in the middle of making a really good point I'll give her a second to see if she can hop back on. But the idea of the echo chamber and being able to find, news content that might affirm your views is.
Can you hear me?
Queenette, your Wi-Fi seems to be acting up a little bit, unfortunately. There's a great doc, which I'll encourage everybody to look at. If I can think of the name of it, I'll put it in the
Yeah,
chat.
I'm right now.
Yeah. Queenette, I'm so sorry. All right. There's a great doc on Netflix about all this. I'll see if I can find the name and put it in the chat. But basically about how the algorithms have created these things too, and it's really, really interesting. I'll say just one thing on my end about technology, covering foreign news. It has enabled us to do so much more. We can have a one-person presence around the world, which in this era of shrinking news budgets actually enables us to cover a larger swath of the world than it used to. It used to be that you needed 3-4 people in a place to be able to get on TV. Now, 1-2 people can do that, and it has really opened a lot of doors for us. The ability to be live from anywhere in the world that has a cell phone signal right now has revolutionized the way we cover news. And actually, I think it's made it really, really incredible. Things that would not be, but at the same time, again, back to Mike's point, has shrunk that news cycle and sped it up so much. That sort of segues into sort of our next question perfectly, which was about the news cycle and the impact of social media on the news cycle. And what does that mean for you? Mike, you're on a daily show, so I think I'm curious to hear from you, but maybe Noah, you can tell us a bit, how do you use social media in your reporting? How does it impact your reporting? How do you use it yourself?
Sure. I think it's become a crucial means of distributing content and actually driving readership. And I'm constantly following people I find interesting or reaching out to sources through social media and getting in touch that way. But I think that the biggest shift has become like the metabolism of news has become like not just daily or hourly, it's literally minute by minute. And I think in my publication, we used to have the luxury of taking 2 months to assemble a story and then having that try to be the definitive like story on that subject. And often you have to move more quickly and hopefully with the same level of accuracy and authority, but things just speed along super quickly.
And I have to apologize that it looks like Queenette has dropped off. I'm hoping that she'll be able to join us soon because she was really in the middle of making some excellent points. So I apologize to everybody for that. Mike, do you want to just pick up where Noah left off there? And maybe if she joins us, I'll repose the question to her.
Yeah, I'll just echo what Noah said. I think that it's I use social media constantly. It's basically where I get my news. It's where a lot of our story ideas are coming from, just because that's where all the big players are. And you have to jump on. If there's a viral tweet or like an interaction that takes place on Twitter between members of Congress or the president or whatever, or something is news is made on Twitter, you have to move, like you have to assemble that segment for the next morning. There's no planning for weeks and months from now, because that cycle just moves so quickly. And I think, yeah, like we've been discussing, there's drawbacks and there's good things about that. But yeah, it's a huge resource. I can't tell you how many times, Mika or Joe have seen a tweet and they're like, let's get this person on. You may never have heard of that person before the tweet, and they're on Morning Joe the next day talking about what they said on Twitter. And it's usually not some random person, but they have a purpose. Like, for example, I guess one of our storylines on Morning Joe right now is the former Republicans, the Republicans who are kind of rebelling from the Trump-controlled wing of the party. So very often you'll find like a state senator who tweets something and it just goes viral. I mean, there's a huge appetite for hearing from those kind of conservatives, and that's kind of bread and butter Morning Joe. So we'll be reaching out to them, getting them on the show pretty often.
And when you think about that, Mike, that really has turned, people talk about the power of the media, and it's true. You can give that guy a spotlight that he may not have had before, but it actually really is turning it around, isn't it? Where everybody has their platform now. They don't need to actually be on Morning Joe. They were famous before you guys put them on TV, and you're chasing them now.
Yeah, it's like a reverse news cycle in some ways. That's exactly right. I like, there's actually a good example. I can't spoil our show for tomorrow, but the Maricopa County Recorder, who this past weekend tweeted back at former President Trump, basically, calling everything the former president said about the recount or a lie. And that tweet had, I don't know, 12 to 20,000 retweets when I saw it, which means that it's probably been seen by far more people that will watch that person, should they be on Morning Joe, who will watch them on Morning Joe. And that's exactly right. But it continues the conversation. It reaches I think it does reach a different type of audience. And I think it reaches a very critical audience, especially in Washington, D.C. I mean, that's the show PR part of me speaking right now. But
so the next topic that we have is the third rail. This is the big one that everybody, I think, particularly in the last 5 years or so, has really, I think, woken to, questioned, thought about in ways that maybe they thought about before, but not is the question of real news, fake news, and opinion journalism. And I think the question that we've posed here for the group is how to tell the difference. And maybe you guys can all offer some tips to everybody who's listening here. But I do also want to get your thoughts on the topic generally, because it is the big question, existential question, really. I mean, in some ways we would hope that it isn't, but it is, because it's become conflated in the eyes of the consumer and in the reader and the viewer. Noah, why don't you start us off on this one?
Sure. Well, in terms of how to differentiate between real news and fake news, I think there's a lot of things you can look for. You can look at tone, how the article is written or how it's presented on air. You can look at the outlet itself and ask questions about the outlet's track record, and also who is funding that outlet and why does it exist and who else is watching it and who benefits from that platform existing. And then I also just think it's about accumulating information, like Queenette was saying, from a lot of different sources and trying to form your own opinions, like based on that news gathering. I think as reporters, it's gotten increasingly tricky with social media, and you have a lot of people offering commentary on their opinions and on other stories online. And then you write your clip and it's a very straightforward news piece, but it's very obvious, as we were talking about before this whole conversation, that every journalist's point of view is colored by their experiences in their life and what they've seen and what they care about. So I think on the one hand, it's on the reader to try to filter through things and look for accuracy. And it's also on journalists to be transparent and careful.
Mike?
Yeah, so I think we briefly touched on this, Kirit, offline, but there's just so much to discuss here. And I think Queenette actually touched on this before she started breaking up, but the decentralization of news, like, it presents a huge question for the industry, and how do we navigate that, and how do we, I think that the best tool that you have right now is just your own judgment, and like when you see something that incredibly aligns with your views, or like seems too good to be true, or seems too crazy to be real, it probably is, and there's a reason to like double check and see if there's other outlets that are reporting that. I think that like that's the best tool we have right now is going back to the standards, like the standard outlets that you trust, and making sure that like this reporting that you're seeing kind of aligns with that. But it's going to be increasingly difficult as the news decentralizes, and like you see, and I'm not saying that it's a bad thing that like Substack is on the rise and that people are doing their own journalism, independent journalism. I think that there's a value in that, but I think you just have to make sure that you're checking like what people are reporting. Just because they have 200,000 followers on Twitter and say something like really fascinating about how Donald Trump is going to be indicted in 7 different countries tomorrow, there's you got to look into that beyond just a few tweets or a Twitter thread, even if it's 40 tweets long, and to do some double checking on it. And that's but it's going to be harder and harder as we move forward, I think.
I think that's right, and I think we're sort of at this crossroads, really, where the onus really now is on the individual, unfortunately. Where trust in traditional media outlets is at historic lows, and you would hope, despite all of that, that with all these challenges, that people would then go back to trusted brands. And I see Queenette's back. That's fantastic. Excellent.
Changed computers.
Oh, I'm so happy.
My computers, technology wasn't doing me right.
There
I
were
guess it didn't like what I was saying.
Way too many men on this panel, Queenette. I'm very happy you're back.
I'm here with the estrogen. Yes.
So the question that we were just talking about was about fake news, Queenette, and how to spot it and what that means. And the one thing that I was just talking about before you rejoined us here was this idea that unfortunately now, you cannot be a passive news consumer anymore. You can't just read what's on your social media profile. You can't necessarily trust what your uncle just posted on Facebook. It's really important, in my mind, to go, if you read something, go see if someone else is reporting it. If it's, in our business, we always beware of what we call the permanent exclusive. That's never good. If you break some news and 2 hours later, you're still the only person reporting it, that's a really uncomfortable place to be, because So if you're seeing it only in one place and it just doesn't match up, it's a red flag right there. I mean, there's so many people writing these days, and a corollary to this, and this is the unfortunate part, I think, for the news consumer. There's a lot of lazy journalists out there too. A lot of people who just sort of read, well, yeah, they wrote that, and they're not an expert in the topic, but they've got to crank out 500 words on something, and they're just quoting another news outlet. And I'm thinking about an example from just a few weeks ago, when you remember that big ship that got stuck in the Suez, and somebody pulled an article, might have been out of Forbes or something. There was an interview with a pulp CEO in Brazil, and he said that there was going to be a toilet paper shortage. Now, that's true. He did say that, but a bunch of lazy journalists saw that article, assumed he was talking about the Suez, and everybody started writing articles about how the Suez thing was going to lead to a toilet paper shortage, and went viral. Well, that article had nothing to do with the Suez. It was just talking about shortages and supply chain stuff. So you have to go back to the source if somebody's being quoted. Again, this is not good news for the news consumer. This is work in a way that we haven't had to do before, but it's essential. Queenette, I'm talking too much. Your turn.
So we're still on the topic of fake news and sort of how to spot it.
The topic of the year.
You know what? I don't really believe in the concept of fake news. I have to be honest. I believe in confirmation bias. I think that people see things sometimes and it affirms beliefs that they want to keep, that they somehow are not interested in challenging for whatever reason. And so, people just sort of believe things because they want to believe it. But I think that if you want to be a responsible consumer, a responsible news consumer, a responsible human being, it's incredibly important that you are getting your news from everywhere. I mean, bias is everywhere in the news industry. I don't know what other people might tell you, but I think, everyone, some people have a whole lot of bias, people have a little bit of bias, but we're all looking at the world through our own windows. I think it's almost impossible to avoid bias altogether. And so you're going to get, I think you're going to get a lot of different sides, a lot of different angles, a lot of different types of information from a lot of different places. And so if you are committed to being a responsible news consumer and you want to be really, really well informed, it is on you to get your news from everywhere. Print, online, different outlets. You have to, otherwise you're never going to get the full picture. And people who do not do that, I'm suspicious of.
I think you raise a very good point about not relying on a single source for anything. I think that's
you can't.
Listen, I have one more sort of broad topic, and then we'll get to some audience questions here. Hopefully this is a quick one that we can just hit here. Just about the pandemic and how it has changed the way you do your job, the way journalism works, and do we think that's here to stay? Mike, why don't you, or no, Queenette, you're back on. Why don't you, you take this one first?
Oh my goodness, guys. This is a big one for me. So sort of more broadly, I never stopped going to work. I went in, to Fox every day. I have a husband, a 5-year-old, a newborn, a 6-week-old. But news is considered essential. And I believe that. I believe the news is essential. So just on the surface, the pandemic, thanks to technology, hadn't really changed the way I did business, because while other people, were staying in, I always had a lot of access to information. Always, I too was a booking producer once, so I always was able to keep in contact with many different guests and many people, many thought leaders from different industries. And so the pandemic didn't really affect the news industry in general all that much, except you needed to be, sort of more on top of what was going on. And depending on what you watched, I think it really would color the way you saw the pandemic, obviously, which is why it's so incredibly important that you watch all the news networks, you read everything. Otherwise you can sort of get stuck in a rut. You're like a horse with blinders on. More sort of personally,
the pandemic was big for me. I lost my mother in February to COVID.
Oh no.
I lost my mom in February to COVID when I was 8 months pregnant. And
February
it
of
was,
this year.
yeah, thank you.
I'm
It
so
was
sorry for that.
I'm so sorry,
incredibly
Queenette. That's
difficult. Yeah, right. I mean, I told Amanda in an email, I was like, I'd been covering the story for so long, right? COVID was #1, where we're watching how many people are dying, and the science is always changing, and we're watching, all of these pressers with the White House. And so this story was very big for me. And then all of a sudden I became a part of the story. And that was really, really, really hard for me. And it actually made it difficult for me to do my job, quite honestly, because I was working at a place that had a very interesting view of the pandemic. And, when you were covering the president and hearing all this talk of a hoax and all this other stuff, we all sort of covered that very differently. I personally know this is no hoax. There's nothing fake, or there are no conspiracy theories, behind this. COVID is a really, really sort of evil, killer that can strike at any time, and strikes anyone. You don't necessarily have to have underlying conditions. My mom didn't really have underlying conditions. She was 70 years old, a woman who walked every day and went to Blink Fitness every day. And, she was on a ventilator for 5 weeks. So COVID is very, very real. But, working at Fox News during the pandemic, where you just had a lot of different voices, a lot of people didn't know what to make of the pandemic when everything first started happening. And so sometimes you hear things that even before my mother passed, even before my mother got sick, I, took some issue with. But in journalism, when you're working for an outlet, um, you're kind of you're working for an audience, right? You kind of know what your audience is looking to hear, but at the same time, you're not trying to sacrifice all of your own beliefs and how you feel about things. And so it became a constant balance of, this is the science. I understand that this is what some people are saying, or this is what you want to believe, but point blank period, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and people need to have all the information that they can, every single thing. So let's please, everyone try very hard to be as even-handed and neutral as possible on this topic. And, for some people and some networks, that was very hard for them to do. And it was painful to watch. I couldn't take part in it. It's not like you're not a person of free will when you're a journalist, when you're a producer. You always have a choice. You always have a choice, and people generally respect that choice. And so there were a lot of times where I was like, I'm not going to produce a block on COVID. If I think that it's going to go a certain way, and maybe it could be, maybe irresponsible. Some might think of it that way. I don't want to take part in it. So it was very difficult covering the pandemic before my mother died, but then after, it was nearly impossible for me because it hit a little too close for home. And so I tried, and sometimes I gathered myself and I got enough strength to do so, and other times I couldn't. Other times I just could not cover that story because it was too personal for me, and the way it was being covered just, didn't agree with me. But
I can only imagine. And the other thing that you touched on earlier too, Queenette, which I think really strikes it for a lot of journalists, is the way, we this industry is slightly relentless. It's a 24/7, life for all of us. And suddenly you're doing it all from home, and there just were no boundaries, between your personal life and everything else. And really hard to balance all those things. Mike, what about you? I mean, your show continued on the air. And I think this is something that we, like I said in the beginning, we're all very proud of the way we've been able to keep our industries going. Do you think that there was anything that we got from the pandemic as journalists that might stick around?
As with most things, yes and no. But first, I just want to say how sorry I am, Queenette. That's just a terrible, unimaginable loss. And I don't think anyone would blame you for never wanting to be involved in COVID stories again. And I can't imagine what it was like working at Fox in particular during that time. So my heart breaks for you and your family. But what I would say is like, yes, I think like very quickly, and it was kind of a miracle to see it happen at NBC. Everyone was remote and we were doing Zooms and Skypes instead of getting people in studios. And we adapted in a way that like just surprised me at how quickly, but it was very like efficient. And but in that way, I don't, that part of it, I don't think is going to be permanent. I don't think you're going to see, and sorry, this is my cat Riley making a little bit of a debut here. I don't think you're going to see that stuff stick around for too long, because at the end of the day, most producers will tell you that a guest in studio is much stronger. Just like speaking to someone face to face is stronger. It creates for better interviews. I think over time we're going to go back to that, and this will kind of be a distant memory. What I will say is that I think that like covering public health, Morning Joe's, the pandemic was the story on Morning Joe for the better part of the last year. I mean, we spoke about the pandemic every morning. We had doctors on almost every morning. It was the dominant story. And I think for most networks and most newspapers and outlets, it was. That said, in our lifetimes, there really hasn't been something that focused and particularly in the realm of public health. And I think that just as our government was kind of learning how to deal with a pandemic as it went, I think the news media kind of was as well. And I think those things are going to be, we're going to have to do our like look back and see how we talk about health and illness and the science and the research, particularly when it was constantly changing. I mean, the amount of times where a tweet or a headline just putting emphasis in the wrong places on new research about COVID, probably, and it's awful to say this, but it probably led to more death and sickness. That said, that's not, I'm not blaming the media for that. I think that it's a societal issue, and I think that the government obviously had failings that we've discussed at length on our show. But I think there's definitely improvement to be made in how we talk about public health and how we talk about a pandemic, a virus. And just I'll add just that, like, I was constantly in touch with friends of mine from Tufts who have far more experience in public health than I do, always checking in with them to say, like, does this tweet make sense? Does this like story, is this new research really, does it mean what people are saying it means? That was really important to me to like constantly check in with them about, and these are like Tufts friends of mine that now work in engineering and public health and have PhDs and everything. And that was like, that's something that I think we all need to be doing going forward. Hopefully we don't have another pandemic, but the next time there's a major public health crisis.
Yeah, let's not do a pandemic again. That would be nice.
Could I just add something? I believe one thing that's going to stay, right, from the pandemic, the politicization of public health. I think we're never going to turn back from this. I think the way, the masks were handled, the different mask mandates, and I'm not wearing a mask, and Fauci said to wear, don't wear them, but really it was, because you don't want to create a run on masks, but now you should wear them. And even now this honor system of, if you're vaccinated, you don't have to wear a mask, but no one's checking to see who's actually vaccinated, and people believing that wearing a mask is a matter of, their freedom, their personal freedoms, and you can't take this away from me, so I'm not going to wear this, and I think this is a trick. I was floored, right, by the way things sort of unfolded during the course of this pandemic and how political it became. I think we'll never turn back from that. I think public health is now, it's not just, I'm doing this because I want to protect my family, myself, and my fellow man. I think there are always going to be a whole bunch of tribes and people who believe the government is trying to muzzle them and trying to kill them, and chips are going to be inserted into their neck when they get a vaccine and so on and so forth. I think that has been blown up, obviously, and that it's here to stay, and it's really, really scary.
Yeah, I
You
think,
know, it's really scary.
yeah, that some of these basic steps became a political statement in and of themselves.
Yeah.
Noah, the final word goes to you, because we are, this is actually a great conversation. We could keep going on this forever, but it's 6:41. I do want to get to some audience questions, but Noah, just your thoughts on your, maybe your workflow in the pandemic, and maybe how that might has changed and might stick around or not.
Sure. Frankly, I'd echo a lot of what Mike and Queenette said. For me personally, just to keep it brief, as a print reporter, the one, I guess you could say, silver lining in an otherwise horrible year was that basically everybody was stuck at home. And so if you're a reporter who wants to reach sources, there's frankly never been a more reliable time to do that. I guess I'll keep it brief there just so we can get to audience questions, but that's my one thought on that.
So we have a lot of questions, and thank you to everybody who submitted questions ahead of time and the people who have submitted them today. Just a lot of them actually won't surprise you guys. A lot of questions about opinion in the media and bias in the media and how people see what they see and how do we get to that point. One question that struck me here, there used to be, I'm reading now, there used to be the editorial decisions about what was important news was by placement, right? The newspaper, above the fold, off the leads, or buried in the paper. Is it the role of journalists, this person asks, and how can journalists ensure that readers, quote unquote, eat their vegetables of important news and not just the trendy topics in today's news environment? Noah, why don't you take that one?
Yeah, I think the answer is it's really, really hard. That when you're at the mercy of algorithms feeding people the content, the sort of sugary cereals of news content, it's really hard to get them to eat their vegetables. So I think without being condescending about it and knowing that there's a really educated public out there capable of seeking out high quality work, I think a lot of it is about upholding institutions that produce well-rounded content that doesn't only drive a lot of clicks. And from my perspective, that only happens when you directly support news outlets or subscribe and pick places that you believe in, that you think are producing quality work. So my short answer is I think it has to come from institutions.
Mike, you want to pick that up from there?
I think that could we go to Queenette first? I want to put some more thought into my response on this.
Of course, Queenette, why don't you pick it up?
Sure. Yes, the institution that you are patronizing or that you work at is incredibly important, but you know what, I think it's a great question because as a producer, that's a big part of your job. So one of the things that, you know, all of us do when you're working in media in general, right? You're going to meet with your team, you're going to meet with your show team, and you're going to discuss all of these topics. Everyone's going to bring news stories that they think are very important and why. And you're all going to sort of sit around and you're going to discuss what you think is the most important. You know, what do you think? Obviously, of course, what is the sexiest? What, you know, is going to translate best on .com? What's going to lead to a lot of clicks on YouTube? You're deciding all of this. But when you're a producer, and for me, particular being a producer of color, it's always really, really important that you bring your voice to those meetings, right? So there are stories that I think are incredibly important, you know, for communities of color. And I think that my job as a producer at Fox News is to advocate for those stories and advocate for those communities. And one thing, you know, about Fox News, it's really, you know, you say what you want about the network, but we rather are very dedicated to voices that, you know, traditionally maybe have not gotten the spotlight, the shine, the time that they have on other media outlets. And that can be a lot of different voices. And so there's a focus on sort of the little guy or the person that hasn't been heard as much. And that's important too. Again, we are all looking at the world through our own windows. It's incredibly important that when people watch your network, when they watch these shows, when they read your website or your newspaper, that they hear their stories and the things that matter to their communities the most. That is how you affirm, right, that you are a part of the fabric that is America. And so as a producer, it's really, 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 really important that if you think something is very important, whether that be just for your community or just in life, that you speak up and you advocate for those stories and you make the case as to why the audience needs to hear this. And, it doesn't, at Fox News, we listen to each other, it doesn't fall on deaf ears. There have been many times that stories that other people, may not have thought were great, I've successfully made the case for. It's your job as a journalist. But then, you're not a man unto yourself, right? You're not an island. And so you're consulting with your executive producer, your senior producer, your other staff members. And if you work, as you said, at a quality organization, they will listen to you and they'll be interested in bringing those stories to light.
Thank you, Queenette. Mike, did you want to take a stab or do you want to move on to the next question?
Just quickly, I'm just so glad I let Queenette go first on that one, because she used the word advocacy and advocating for stories. And I think that there was definitely like a debate about are journalists really advocates at the end of the day? And this was maybe a few years back, just I read some pieces on it and there was discussion on Twitter about it, but we really are. I mean, that the answer to the question is yes. Like it's so important to have diverse perspectives, whether it's in your booking team, production team, or on your masthead at a paper, because
especially in booking, Mike, especially in booking,
particularly
you have to have
booking,
those voices on your show, and that's your job.
That's 100% true. But I don't even just mean on the show. I mean, 100% true on the show, but also like, because we also play a part in which stories are making it onto the show by who we're picking. Like, you have to have diverse perspectives on your team who are going to say like, this is important, I think we should talk about this. And like, I've been involved in those discussions sometimes where it takes that person to say it multiple times and to really fight for that story to make it into the program. And it's absolutely important. And at the end of the day, like we're talking about bias, like, yes, we all have our bias. And that's why you need a team to make it work and to, listen and value different perspectives.
Yeah, Mike, I would totally jump in and second that idea. I mean, the idea that, we're supposed to be in our industry, and we take this responsibility very seriously, attempting to understand the country and explain what's happening. And that's impossible to do unless you have people who have lived experience on your team attempting to explain that otherwise. And it's a critical point. One other question I wanted to get to here, and forgive me for everybody, I don't have the names of the people who submitted these, but this gets to one of the questions that we had earlier. This is one of the pre-submitted questions. What can journalists do to restore trust in the media? And we were talking earlier about how trust is at an all-time low when you look at all the polling in news outlets. What can individuals and what can organizations do? Mike, why don't you take this one?
On trust and like rebuilding trust?
Yeah. It's a loaded, I know I'm throwing it right at.
Yeah. I think that this one's really hard. We chatted about it a little bit beforehand. I think that I think we're facing a different reality now. We're not going back to the 80s or 70s when people went to 3 channels to get their news. I mean, it's never going to be that way again. And the way that news outlets, and whether that means like a TV station or an individual who has a Substack, are going to build trust is whether they have reporting over time that's credible, that lines up with truth. And people are going to, like we've discussed, it's going to be up to the individual a little bit to weed through that stuff. And it's going to be pattern, and it's going to be practice of getting it right multiple times, over and over again, developing a history of that, and just being honest with your audience when you don't have the information, when you're not certain about information that you've been given, being clear about sources as much as you can. Of course, we all know there's circumstances where you can't reveal your sources, but and then at least say why. A lot of times in reporting, the New York Times and Washington Post will say why they're not revealing the identity of a source. I think that's really important. That kind of honesty goes a long way in developing that trust and rebuilding it.
Mike, I know I threw it right in your face there, but I think you nailed it. I mean, the one thing about reputations is they're really hard to build, and really easy to lose. And trust is the same way. And that goes with a journalist and his source and a journalist and his audience. Noah, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that was a really great answer, stated better than I could have. The only thing I'd say is tying it back to our conversation earlier about the fire hose of information coming through social media is I would imagine, or at least hope, that at a point when it becomes even harder to differentiate fact from fiction online, and you have these deep fake videos making things more complicated and getting more sophisticated, that society will have to turn to people who make their living trying to stick to the facts. So I think it's about trying to be transparent, like Mike said, and just really trying to consistently do good and honest work.
Okay. I'm going to try to get one more. Oh, sorry, Queenette, I didn't give you a chance to speak on this one. Sorry. Did you want to add anything to this one?
Oh, no, I mean, I think everyone, pretty much, hit it on the head. But I think most importantly, people have to trust themselves. I mean, what you want, what you need for yourself and your family, what means the most to you. And so, when you watch television, when you watch all of these different networks, I think you should take in the information, but you have to trust yourself to sort through that information, and figure out what's important for you and your family. But more importantly, I think you always have to do a little bit of your own research. So I'm not putting it all on the consumer. Absolutely, anchors and news outlets have a responsibility to be honest and truthful. But that's pretty much what all sort of news agencies believe that they're doing, right? I mean, no one is really looking to lie to you. I think that people generally you can spin anything. Anything can be spun. So I think it's really important, as I keep saying, that you watch everyone, that you watch all the different networks all the time. And, don't be afraid to do your own research. I mean, journalists are wonderful, but we are, no better and we're not loads smarter than everyone else. Okay, we have huge research teams. We're all doing research. We're reading everything. We're looking through everything. Who's not, what's stopping you from being your own journalist? Nothing's stopping you. So don't be afraid to do your own research, to put in the work, to read as much as you can, to read international news, to read local news sources. I love local news. They are the people who are down on the ground. They are closest to the source, and they're really, really good about not having too much bias or agenda infect the way they tell the story. So I think people should always make sure that they are getting their news from multiple sources, and not to be lazy. Okay, you can do some of the legwork yourself too, because you're going to get a little bit of the story from everywhere. And if you really want to put together a nice cohesive picture for yourself, it's probably going to take a little legwork on your part as well.
I'm going to 100% agree with what you said there about not relying on one single source. And your endorsement of local news, the newspapers, the stations, it is, the little secret about the networks is that we're watching them, and a lot of those ideas come.
Absolutely.
They are the ones with their ear to the ground. And unfortunately, the real challenge these days is a lot of those local news sources, the revenue models that they relied on are drying up, and it is a real challenge for those communities and for the news business in general. We have maybe a couple minutes left, and so I'm going to ask you guys about you and your news diet, and when you wake up in the morning, where you get your news from, and how do you read in? How about Queenette? How about you? You take this one for the last question here.
Okay, so as a producer, I literally look at everything. As I said, I really do like local news. I go to, the ABC in Atlanta. I'll go to the Fox News in Florida. I read everything in news. We all kind of have a like a recipe, right? We know sort of what we're all looking at our ratings all the time. We know which blocks, which periods of time we're getting the most eyes and what, you know, stories those correspond to. So we know what stories sort of get our audience really sort of, you know, interested. And so I'm always looking for stories that are, you know, funny, that are interesting, that haven't been reported on all that much. And that's where local news comes in, because that's, you know, that's where all the good stuff comes from. I think the juicy nuggets come from local news, and the national news helps to blow them up a little bit. But in general, I look everywhere. I look, you know, I look to my own network. I look because my show is early prime time. So I see what our morning shows are doing. That's going to be Fox and Friends. I look at Newsweek. I look at Forbes. I, you know, look at MS. I look at NBC. I sort of read everything. Now, personally, I am I'm a huge fan of all the networks. I go to foxnews.com. I go to cnn.com. MS has a really great site called Make It, where they just talk about, or CNBC rather, Make It, and they just sort of, it's like inspiration and like how to reach your financial goals and things like that. Those are the sort of things that interest me. And then I'm a mommy. So, you know, I read mommy blogs. I go on Instagram. I look at, you know, cute baby pictures. I, you know, shop a lot. But news for me, work-wise, there's nothing I won't read. Work-wise, I read everything. Personally, I read everything just because you're gonna, and it's funny. I want everyone, this is a homework assignment. Everyone, I want you to go in the morning. I want you to go to foxnews.com, then go to msnbc.com, go to cnn.com, you know, go to AB, go visit everyone's homepage, and you'll see some of the same stories, and then you'll notice a trend, you know, you'll notice a slant, and it'll be very interesting. That's everyone's homework assignment. Hit up all the major news outlets, hit up all of their main pages for their .coms to see what everyone's covering, and then what only some people are covering. And I think it'll be the beginning of your eyes opening as to how we all operate.
Noah, you're up.
Sure. So I try to read a little bit of everything also. I'm addicted to the New York Times. I read the Journal and the magazines like the Atlantic and the New Yorker. Like Mike, I'm also on Twitter, like I think every reporter out there. And I hope the TV people don't get mad at me, but I'm on YouTube a lot too, watching stuff, whether it's from the networks or just upstart people, or I don't know, even outlets like Eater just do really innovative work on YouTube. So I'm all over the place.
All right, Mike, you get the last word.
Axios AM, Punchbowl News, and the New York Times morning letter, the Notes on the News in the Wall Street Journal morning newsletter, and then I just kind of work my way out from there because they'll link to all the big stories. Obviously, just like my own inbox is like we have our own reporting and stuff that's coming in at NBC. And then I'm a little bit distracted because I'm watching our show from 6 to 9 to make sure that everything's going well with our guests. But and so I'm getting news from there as well sometimes too.
If you guys are like me, you wake up to hundreds of emails and it takes you all morning to get through them, and then it's time to get to work. Look, that's a wrap, everybody. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have. I just want to thank everybody for being here. This was a really thought-provoking conversation. I think we could have gone on forever. But thank you to our attendees. Congratulations to those of you who are celebrating your reunion milestones. And I encourage you to check out the impressive schedule of programming that's been scheduled this week. Go to go.tufts.edu/reunion programming. Thank you all for joining us. Take care.